Hey everybody, Greg Pruitt here with the Idaho Dispatch, and I am joined today by Miss Sue Zoldak. How are you today?
Good. How are you, Greg? It's nice to speak with you.
Yeah, you as well. Most of you watching this obviously do not know who Sue is. Idaho Dispatch wanted to get a poll conducted, a scientific poll for the Republican primary for the governor's race and lieutenant governor's race to kind of gauge an idea of where the candidates stand at this point in time when we had the poll conducted. And so we got in contact with Sue from Zoldak Research, and you are the company that conducted this poll on behalf of the Idaho Dispatch. And so I guess for since nobody knows who you guys are, maybe you can give a really quick, a brief description of your company and what you guys do, and then from there we'll talk about the actual poll that was conducted itself.
Great. Thanks, Greg. So we are a trilogy of firms based here in Washington, D.C. I have been working in the public affairs, political consulting space for about 20 years now. And so Zoldak Research is one of the arms of our public affairs and issue advocacy companies. And so we do all forms of public opinion research, quantitative as well as online quantitative, so online focus groups. We go in the field quite often, most often to do message testing because our primary business is an advertising agency. We run campaigns, we provide full service creative. So we help campaigns create the right message, the winning creative. But we also do political polling quite a bit, of course, more often as we come up into these even number years, as we're coming up into 2022 now. So we're excited to start off the year here right on the first with the first poll here in Idaho on the governor's race.
Yeah, and so I guess just to make sure as well, since you guys do lots of different arms with your company, you're not tied to any of the campaigns here in Idaho. We just reached out to you as like, hey, can you tell us, based on your polling, who is winning these races, right? There's
That is
no ties
correct.
to any of the actual
That is
campaigns.
correct. We're not employed by any of the candidates or any of the independent expenditure campaigns in the state that are involved in the current governor's race. Our companies have run issue campaigns in almost all 50 states, Idaho included, but we're not currently involved in any of the candidate races.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, when we reached out to you, there's lots of different ways to do polling. Sometimes there's push polling where, a campaign will be like, hey, we want some polling done, but we want you to kind of push it in this direction, or maybe it's on an issue or whatever. But for us as a media organization, our goal was simply to say who is winning. That's all we really cared about as a company, as a news outlet. Was not, we didn't want you guys to push in any particular direction. It was just, hey, out of all the candidates, who's winning, and head to head, who's winning between, in both the governor's race as well as the lieutenant governor's race. And that's the extent of, I guess, the direction that that we gave you guys on what we were looking for.
Correct, correct. So when we look at designing a methodology for every poll, first we look at who is the universe, how can we best match the demographics of the universe, because the accuracy of the poll is based on how best we can mimic what is going to happen in real life. So in this case, we were looking for people who were likely to vote in the May primary. And so we deployed a combination of landline and mobile random digit dialing. So this is the traditional format of calling or quantitative polling in any political race is random digit phone calls. So we had an N here of 575. So out of your universe of people who are registered to be able to vote in your Republican primary, that gives us a margin of error of plus or minus 4% here. And the other thing to remember is that we screened for that they're registered to vote, but we also screen for, are you likely to vote? Because obviously if we poll a bunch of people who say they're actually not going, they're very unlikely to participate in the voting process, this poll isn't going to be representative of the turnout of the people who are actually going to show up. And so we screened out everyone who said that they were unlikely to participate. So what you have left here are people who are likely to participate, registered voters who were randomly selected.
Okay. And so when you go through the numbers here in a second, it's plus or minus 4. So for those that don't, I assume most people know what that means, but you could either add potentially 4% or take away 4% from the numbers that you're giving.
Yep, and that's pretty standard for a poll of this size.
Okay. And I guess maybe one question before you get into the numbers. So we have a sample size of 575. You know, what would be the response, I guess, to people who say it's only 575 people out of, you know, I think in Idaho there's somewhere in the range of 500 some odd thousand Republican voters. You know, is that a standard sample size for a statewide race? Is it smaller, larger? What, in your experience in polling, in the polling industry?
This is a pretty standard size, just because everyone's trying to balance cost of doing this versus the increase in what we call the confidence level. So not to get too mathematical, but what we have is a 95% confidence window that the actual numbers will fall within that plus or minus 4%. Even if we were to increase the number of respondents from 575 to double that, we would probably only drop the margin of error to about plus or minus 3%. So there's still, there wouldn't be a huge increase. And if you look on polling aggregators like Real Clear Politics, and you go and look at the other polls that were done in the last cycle for the governor's races, you will find that most of them are resting in this 400 to 600 range for polling.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I guess we'll turn it over to you, Sue, and you have just a kind of a short presentation on kind of the overview, the 30,000 foot window of what we saw, and then we'll have some questions after that as well.
Yeah. So let me a little bit. Okay. Are you seeing the slides?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, as opposed to kind of the funny notes page that I'm getting. Yeah. Okay, so as we said, so we polled just about a week ago, between December 20th and 22nd. We were out in the field. We collected 575 responses. The first thing I just want to do is lay the groundwork of where we are in the state, because I think this will become important, especially when you have an incumbent in the race, because a lot of times people are looking at what kind of race are they trying to run. Are they trying to run a race about change, or are they trying to run a race about status quo? And almost often it boils down to this: do you think that your state is going in the right or wrong direction? And when we see really high numbers here in one direction or another, that either signals a difficult uphill climb for the incumbent or not, or it signals that a certain kind of messaging is going to have to happen, right? So it's important to take a look at where we are. And in Idaho, with these, now remember, we only polled Republican likely voters. So this is your people who are registered to want to vote in that May primary. So this is not the overall population, but out of those people who said that they were likely to participate in the May governor's primary race, you have about 63% saying the state is going in the right direction. That far outweighs the 25% going in the wrong direction. This also mimics, I think, where where a lot of people are seeing in their state right now. And I know that seems, it seemed hard to believe, because if you read the headlines, it seems like, there's a lot of horrible things happening, whether it's natural disaster wise or with the pandemic, with the economy. It seems like there would be a lot of unhappiness. And there is, if we ask people if they're happy or unhappy, that's a different question. But this is more about the performance and the direction of your state. And that really is tied in a lot of people's mind to the governor.
Okay. Okay.
So when we asked the full slate of the potential candidates, including the incumbent Brad Little, and you'll see the rest of the slate here. So we have Janet McGeehan, is that right? Right, I want to get it right. Eamon Bundy, Ed Humphreys, Steve Bradshaw, and Cody Usabel. We have quite a lead for the incumbent at this time. Now, of course, this has taken almost 6 months out, 5.5 months out. That's still a lifetime to go in a political sense. And so things could change, but that is a pretty big lead. You could say that, it depends on your point of view. Some people might say we haven't really started campaigning. We're waiting for, New Year's, to start the year off, to really start pushing, clear the clutter of 2021 out and really start pushing. So, we're not here to, as a pollster, again, we don't work for any of the campaigns, and I'm not here to say, what the status of any campaign is. I'm just here to tell you these are the numbers at this one snapshot in time.
Okay.
It's also important to note that when given the full slate, the undecideds are quite low at 12%, almost 13, but that's not a huge number of undecideds given the sum total choices, right?
Okay.
Now, what we really found interesting was when we asked about the favorability of each of the candidates. So I'm going to walk you through, I know this looks like a lot of data here. I'm going to walk you through, and really just I want you to focus on the colors as opposed to the individual numbers, because the colors really tell a story here. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the names of the candidates listed again, and the order that they're listed are according to their net favorability rating, which is on the far right side of the slide. Net favorability is calculated by taking the sum total of very favorable and somewhat favorable, so all the people who had a positive feeling about that person, and subtracting the very unfavorable and somewhat unfavorables, and subtracting those two, and the difference between those are your net favorabilities. And so I do want to point out that, Brad Little has a very high and a strong favorability rating. You can see the dark blue there. And I think that, that's the first takeaway. And then the second takeaway is that neutral tan color in the middle band that you see coming down the middle. And you'll see that, very few people have a neutral feeling about Brad Little, but we have a large band of neutral for Bradshaw, Humphreys, and Usabel. Almost a third of the people have a neutral feeling about those candidates. And then we have about 1/5 of the respondents having a neutral feeling about McGeehan and Bundy. That's quite a lot of, kind of an undecided. And then the last thing I want to point out is the gray band. The gray band are people who say they've never heard of this candidate. And you can see that we have quite a name recognition issue right now for some of the candidates, with the gray band again being very large for Bradshaw, Humphreys, and Usabel, and very manageable for McGeehan and Bundy, right? So, although we did what is traditional here in terms of ranking the candidates by their net favorability, you'll see that for the three candidates in the middle third there, Bradshaw, Humphreys, and Usabel, because they're neutral ratings and they're unknown, kind of outweigh their positives and negatives. I would almost say, their net favorability rating is not quite as important as the fact that they haven't quite achieved a name recognition that would allow people to even give a positive or negative opinion about that candidate. So it's a little bit less important to focus on their net favorability here. But you can see that, here is where I would really be watching the numbers as a pollster and see how these change over time. It'd be interesting to take a look at this chart in a couple months as people start getting their message out there and seeing if there's any big shifts here.
Okay.
And then the last thing is we asked some head-to-head matchups between some of the candidates that polled, that had some actual statistically significant polling numbers against Brad Little. So the candidate that actually polled the best against Brad Little at this point in time, remember late December, is Janet McGeehan. She came out at about 23% for her versus 65 for Brad Little. So we have here the three charts: the incumbent in blue, the challenger in green, and then the undecided in that yellow section. So you'll see that Brad Little is still at a plus 36 against McGeehan, but she is the top performer out of the remaining group and by double digits. So McGeehan outperforms the next highest candidate option, challenger, by plus 20 or almost plus 20 points. As you see, almost everybody else in the field is behind by more than 50 points at this time. But again, I think what we're seeing is the difficulty of people not having heard of the candidate or not knowing enough about the candidate to make that decision, as opposed to really having a negative opinion versus that person against Brad Little. But that's where, again, I would bring it back to the first slide about whether the state is going in the right or wrong direction. When you have people feeling comfortable with this way that the state is going, if they go into the ballot box and they aren't sure about the second option, the easiest thing to do is to just vote for the status quo.
Okay. So some of, I guess, the questions that folks might have regarding the results might be, I guess, the demographics, and I don't want to get too much into a ton of details because there's a lot of details that you sent us that could take a long time to do. But what did you see, I guess, overall as you looked at the different age brackets and gender brackets and how conservative people were, or some of those crosstabs? Did you notice any differences between like this age group went this direction more and education level went with this candidate more? Did you notice anything?
It was really interesting to look at the crosstabs here, because what we noticed is that Brad Little universally wins across all of the different demographics. He does not have a significant dip in support by age. There was no significant difference in the age groups in his performance, nor was there a significant difference by education level, by income level, by gender. And so what we found was interesting was that there were no differentials in the crosstabs for Brad Little. The only person, and for the other candidates, to be honest, not enough people chose them for the crosstabs out of 575 to be enough to look at. There just wasn't enough data. For Janet McGeehan, what we did notice is that she was a little bit more attractive to people who did not have a college education, but had a higher income. So as your income went up, people were a little bit more likely to vote for McGeehan. And then as your education level went up, you were less likely to vote for McGeehan. That tracks with the demographics for perhaps being more popular in rural areas, and it also tracks with being I believe she is the Trump endorsed candidate, and so those numbers track with Trump supporters as well.
Okay. I guess, do you have anything else on the governor's poll before we mention the one question about the lieutenant governor? We only did
Well, I
one.
didn't, I completely, yes. I actually forgot to make the slide on that, which I don't even know why I forgot. But yes, let's talk about that. But I have the numbers for that. So let's just come back to us. We did poll on the lieutenant governor, and I think you and I talked about this, is just that, people are not sure of their choice yet, right? So
Yeah.
we have, let's share the data here. So in the lieutenant governor's race, you have Scott Bedke and Priscilla Giddings, right?
Correct.
And so we have half of the voters, half undecided at this point between those, and we have Bedke leading Giddings by plus 22. So there is a significant gap between the two, but I wouldn't read so much into that, because again, that is outweighed by the 50% of voters who said that they were undecided. And so I think, it just tells me that it's going to be a long 5 months for these candidates.
Yeah.
A lot can happen when you have 50% undecided.
Correct. And that's the only question we had, just because of limited abilities on the amount of questions that we could have for what we were able to do for this polling. So that is the only question. We don't have a lot of the other crosstabs and other data that we had on the other race, but that was a large undecided amount of voters that I've seen in a poll like this for two candidates for a big race.
It definitely. We were kind of surprised at that too. And I think, that says, to me, and I'm not in Idaho like you are, that, one, people are much more invested in the governor's race than they are in the lieutenant governor's race right now. But two, that they just don't have the information. And, I would say there's media fatigue right now, right? There's so much information that people are trying to take in about, the pandemic, about, all kinds of things right now, trying to learn about these two lieutenant governor candidates is probably not high on somebody's priority in terms of, when they're scrolling through their phone and seeing news articles or going through their email inboxes. That may just, be a matter of prioritizing time right now and saying, my brain can only take so much right now. And so at this point, I'm going to skip over that for now, kind of the put a pin in it mentality, right? And I'll come back to that because I know I have a couple months to learn more. And I just, people, what we're seeing just in general polling and in other places around the country are, people are at their mental and emotional max capacity, right? And so I think as we find and as we pull about these issues, especially if it doesn't tie into literally survival mode right now, it's hard to get people's attention.
Okay. I don't know that I had any other questions on the data. Yeah, I don't think I had anything else on the data. I do want to, I guess, just throw in, not necessarily for you, but for for people watching, Idaho Dispatch, we try to be as unbiased and independent as we can be. There are some candidates who have active C1, which means they file paperwork to run for governor. Some of those are from old campaigns. Some people are not campaigning at all and have not done anything. And because of our limited space on questions, we tried to just include the candidates who are actively campaigning, have officially announced, have some sort of website. And that was the basis for how we were able to figure out how many candidates we could cram into this thing and be as fair as, because I think a lot of media companies probably would have left off a number of these candidates deliberately, because they only want you to focus on 1, 2, 3 candidates, where we were like trying to be as fair as possible and to include anyone who is actually actively campaigning. But Did you have anything else, Sue, that you wanted to add about the polling that we haven't talked about already?
No, I think you make a good point, though. I mean, any accurate poll needs to match the way the ballot is going to look, right? And so, we can do a touch point where we do the head to heads, right? But the full ballot, the way it's going to be printed, is always going to be, traditionally and scientifically, the way that you want, as we get closer, as you get closer to May, is going to be the way that people are going to want to ask the question.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you taking time. Thank you, first of all, for doing this poll for us. And then, thank you for taking the time to kind of do a video explanation. I think video is a great way for people to get this information. And a lot of people don't like to read, they like to see video. And so we appreciate you taking the time to help us out today.
Perfect. Thank you,
All right.
Greg. It was nice
Thank
talking.
you. You too.